This is lesson 1-2 in your textbook, Understand Rational Numbers. In your interactive notebook off of Canvas, you should have pulled up a real number system diagram that looks like this. We are going to focus on the rational number side of the diagram, beginning at the very center at natural numbers. When we are talking about natural numbers, we are referencing the first numbers that you learn. They are your counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on. These natural numbers are our starting point. From there, we are going to go into whole numbers. When we start talking about whole numbers, the box of whole numbers contains all the natural numbers, but it also includes the number 0. 0 is a whole number, but it is not a natural number. If you look at your natural numbers, the number 3 is natural and it is also whole. From here, we are going to move into integers, and we spoke about integers in our last lesson. Integers are the opposites of the natural numbers. We're also going to include whole numbers and natural numbers. So in the integer spot, we have -1, -2, -3, and so on infinitely to the left of 0. Then we bring up into rational numbers. Rational numbers are going to be our fractions and our repeating and terminating decimals. We could have the fraction 1/2. -1/7. We have mixed numbers, 2 and 3/4. -1 and 6/7. But remember, we also have our decimals. We could have 1.7 or 1 7/10. -3 and 15/100. These are both terminating decimals. But rational numbers are also going to include the repeating decimals. 0.3 repeated, or -1.17, where both the 1 and the 7 repeat. So this is the beginning of our real number system. We'll focus in on irrational numbers at a later time. Vocabulary is going to be an important part of our class. We should have a vocabulary section in your binder, and the vocabulary for this unit was on the previous day's information. Decimal expansion. With your decimals, they could either be a repeating decimal or a terminating decimal. A repeating decimal will be shown with either a bar over the part that is repeated, or it may be shown with an ellipsis, where we show what's repeating and we end it with 3 dots. A terminating decimal is simply one that ends. It could end in a 0. That means if I have 6.3, the next number after that is going to be a 0. Rational numbers are any number that can be written as a fraction. All repeating and terminating decimals have a fraction form. We do not want to confuse these with irrational numbers. These are numbers that cannot be written as a fraction. Today we're going to look at converting between fractions and decimals. If you remember that when we have a fraction, we have a numerator and we have a denominator. To convert a fraction to a decimal, we are going to take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. If you're doing this by hand, it's good to use the division box. The numerator would go inside and the denominator would go on the outside. On page 16 of your textbook, we're going to look at converting these 4 rational numbers into their decimal equivalent. In order to change 7/20 into a decimal, we're going to take the numerator 7 and divide it by the denominator of 20. That will get us the decimal 35/100. Negative 23/20ths, we want to be careful about our negative. Place your negative up with your numerator, but not with the denominator. We do not need two negatives because our answer will come out positive. Negative 23 divided by 20 gives us the decimal equivalent of negative 1 and 15/100ths. Changing C, 1/18 into its decimal equivalent followed the same process. The numerator of 1 divided by 18 is going to give us a repeating decimal, 0.05, where the 5 repeats itself. And finally, D, negative 60 divided by the denominator of 22 is going to be equal to negative 2.72, where the 7 and the 2 repeat. Question 5. There are 5,280 feet in a mile. What part of a mile in decimal form will you drive until you reach the exit? This exit is 1,000 feet away. So our fraction is 1,000 feet out of 5,280 feet. We want to convert this fraction into a decimal. 1,000 divided by 5,280 is equal to the decimal 0.1893, and the 9 and 3 repeat. It would be a good time to pause here on the video and work questions 6 through 22 and then start the video back to check your answers. Question 6. The decimal equivalent of 2/3 is 0.6 repeated. The decimal equivalent of 3/11ths is 0.27, where the 2 and the 7 both repeat. 8 and 4/9. You have two options here. You can divide the fraction out, or you can convert the mixed number into an improper fraction. 8 and 4/9 is equivalent to 76/9. If you need a reminder on how to get that, we did 9 times 8, and then we added the 4. We worked counterclockwise. Now, when we divide 76 by 9, we get 8.4 repeated. Question 9. Is 1.02 with 27 repeated a rational number? Yes, it is rational because it is a repeating decimal, and all repeating decimals are rational numbers. Question 10. Which should Aaron use to convert a fraction to a decimal? Remember, a fraction has a numerator and a denominator. So we do numerator divided by denominator, but all of these are written with the fraction bar, so we would do C. Why would we not do D? We wouldn't do D because it multiplies it by 100. Question 11. Is the fraction 1/3 equivalent to a terminating decimal or a decimal that does not terminate? If we take the numerator of 1 and divide it by the denominator of 3, we are going to get 0.3 repeated. This means that we have a decimal that does not terminate. Question 12. This goes to the real number system chart that we went over. Determine whether the number belongs to each set. Negative 34. Is negative 34 a whole number? If you remember back to your chart, whole numbers are only positive. They include 0 and all of our natural numbers. Negative 34 is an integer. If it is an integer, it is also a rational number. I want you to think about something with these questions here when we're classifying a number. If I were to give you the fraction negative 12 over 2 and asked you to classify this. We may immediately guess that it's rational because it's a fraction, but did you also know that it's an integer? I know this because if I take negative 12 and divide it by 2, I get negative 6. Something to keep in mind when we classify our numbers. Question 13. Ariel incorrectly says that 2 5/8 is the same as 2.58, or 2 58 First, we want to convert 2 5/8 to a decimal. 2 5/8 is equivalent or equal to 21 over 8. This, when we divide it out, is equal to 2.625, or 2 625 This is not Ariel's answer. More than likely, Ariel forgot that she needs to divide out her fraction. Question 14. Consider the rational number 3/11. What are the values of A and B in B divided by A when you use division to find the decimal form? When we find the decimal form, if we look at A and B, you can go back to question 10 and see that B is in the numerator position and A is in the denominator position. That would make B equal to 3 and A equal to 11. How do you find the decimal form? Well, if you divide 3 divided by 11, you are going to get 0.27, where the 27 repeats. Question 15. At a grocery store, Daniel wants to buy 3 1/5 pounds of ham. What decimal should the digital scale show? We need to write 3 1/5 as a fraction and then divide. That means they want you to take 3 1/5 and rewrite it as an improper fraction. Let's review. To write it as an improper fraction, we would do 5 times 3 to get 15 and add 1 to give us 16 over 5. If we divide 16 by 5, we get 3.2. Let's look at question 16. At a butcher shop, Hilda bought beef and pork. She left with 18 8/25 pounds of meat. Express the number of pounds of pork she bought using a decimal. Looking at this problem, the only other information they give us is that she bought 8 17/20 pounds of beef. She bought beef and pork, so we need to figure out just the pork, and we want it as a decimal. So let's begin by converting our information into decimals. The 18 8/25 pounds of meat total is equivalent to 18 32 The 8 17/20 pounds of beef she bought is equivalent to 8 85 pounds. If we know the total and we know the beef, we need to subtract in order to find what is left for the pork. When you subtract, you find that she has 9 47 pounds of pork. Question 17. Is 9.373 a repeating decimal? Is it rational? Well, first of all, it is not a repeating decimal because there is no bar notation or ellipsis at the end of the problem. 9.373 would be repeating if we put a bar over it or had those 3 dots at the end known as an ellipsis. It is rational, though, because it is a terminating decimal. Question 18. Aiden has one box that is 3 3/11 feet tall and a second box that is 3 27 feet tall. If he stacks the boxes, about how tall will the stack be? First, we're dealing with a fraction and a decimal. They need to be the same form, and decimals seem to be easier to work with. So 3 and 3/11, if we turn it into a fraction, we would get 36/11. That is equivalent to 3.27 repeated. This is his first box. His second box is 3.27, and he's going to stack them. So we are going to add them, but we're going to estimate. And 3.27 repeated, since the next number is a 2, because the 27 is in a repeat, that's going to round the 7 to stay the same. If we add them together, we get 6.54 feet. That is about how tall the stack of boxes will be. Question 19, you are adding air to a tire. The air pressure in the tire should be 32 and 27/200 pounds per square inch. What decimal should you watch for on the digital pressure gauge? Okay, so we have 32 and 27/200 pounds per square inch. Instead of turning this into a fraction, I want us to do it another way. The 32 is our whole number, so it is going to be the number that is to the left of the decimal. Now, I want us to divide out 27/200. When we do that, we find out that we get 0.135 at the right of the decimal. So we should be looking for the decimal equivalent, 32 and 135 thousandths pounds per square inch. Question 20. Dion has a pizza with a diameter of 10 1/3 inches. Is the square box big enough to fit the pizza inside? Justify your answer. Your work will justify your answer. First, let's turn 10 1/3 into a decimal. The decimal equivalent here is 10.3 repeated. Is 10.3 repeated larger or smaller than 10.38? It is smaller, so yes, the pizza will fit into the box. Question 21. Which of the following shows 117 and 151/200 as a decimal? If you divide out the decimal part, 151/200, you are going to get 0.755. So the answer is A. Question 22. Use the negative fractions -4/5 and -5/6. Find the decimal equivalent for each fraction. -4/5 is equivalent to -8/10. -5/6 is equivalent to -0.83 with a repeated 3. Part B, which is a repeating decimal? The -5/6 is the repeating decimal, and the 3 is the digit that begins the repeating. I hope you've done well on this lesson and you've got the homework for this lesson, and the next thing that we're going to do is look into the packet for lesson 1-1 in regards to the advanced rational numbers that we want to look at.